Breaking tonight, the National September 11th Memorial Museum, just weeks from opening, facing explosive new controversy over its portrayal of the terrorists who murdered 3,000 Americans. Good evening, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. This is the Kelly File. More than 12 years after that terrible day, the memorial is built. The exhibits are in place. But tonight, critics are focusing on a video barely 7 minutes in length. A film on Al-Qaeda and the radical Islamic ideology they used to justify hijacking 4 planes and crashing them in Pennsylvania, in Washington, D.C., and into the Twin Towers in New York City. Now, just weeks from the museum's opening at Ground Zero, critics are raising objections that the video and its mention of radical Islam is not softer in its presentation, that it doesn't try to distinguish Al-Qaeda and radical Islam from Islam in general. The museum is not releasing the video right now, but provided us some of the script, in which the narrator, Brian Williams of NBC News, by the way, reads, quote, "The program tracks Al-Qaeda's embrace of violence and the decision of its leadership to commit mass murder at the dawn of the 21st century." Joining me now, Reverend Chloe Breyer, who is one of those raising concerns with the video. She's executive director of the Interfaith Center of New York and an associate priest at St. Philip's Church of Harlem. And Brooke Goldstein, who's a human rights attorney and director of the Lawfare Project. We're going to start with Reverend Breyer. Reverend Breyer, good to see you. So, great. Just so our viewers know, you do happen to be the daughter of Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, and so there is a relation there, but he's not involved in this issue in any way. So you're an Episcopal minister, and Reverend, and you object to this, as does your group, and a Muslim representative in the group has walked off of the group, I'm told, because what? Because you feel like there should be a line item in there saying, oh, and by the way, radical Islam is different from regular Islam?
Let me just step back. I served with many other people from different faith traditions as chaplains after 9/11 down at the morgues and at Ground Zero to really be a presence of ministry down there. And it was an event that radically, affected my life and ministry in New York City in 2001. We are thrilled with much of the work that the museum has done to honor that day and to tell that incredibly difficult story. What we're saying is that we want and expect a little bit more from this video that you mentioned, that it needs context. It needs something about Islam as George Bush would say, a peace-loving religion, and that is the context out of which a few, insanely violent and horrific individuals.
But why does it need context? Because according to the way the New York Times reported it, the issue is whether, according to you, your group, whether it is appropriate or inflammatory for the museum to use terminology like Islamist and jihad. What is wrong with using jihad to describe what happened to us on 9/11?
Nothing when it's put in context. Jihad is of the violent nature that we saw so tragically on 9/11 is one of many different kinds of activities. The ones that most Muslims adhere to is the struggle to do good, which is a powerful and real struggle, the struggle to be able to fast.
Are you saying that that's another form of jihad?
Yes, exactly right.
Okay, but the way that jihad is used generally in this country is to understand those who want to commit war, who want to commit acts of terror.
Well, that's been,
Are you worried that somebody's going to think they're going to have a Muslim friend who's talking about jihad, about food, and they're going to start sitting across the dinner table and think, oh, this person must be a terrorist?
I'm a little bit worried about that.
Really?
Exactly, because for the same reason of your own reaction, the media has been so intent on reporting jihad as violent warfare.
That's how people believe the term. It's not up to you to then now introduce at the 9/11 memorial a different use of jihad that is known in much smaller circles.
Right. It's not smaller circles. It's the entire faith of Islam that knows jihad as the ability to wage the struggle to do good. I'm just saying that is the common And if you went to Indonesia, of millions of Muslims, if you went to anywhere around the world, and in our own city, the Muslim New Yorkers would know jihad with that term. And I'm just saying that it's fine to use it in a violent context, but you've got to explain that there's a wider meaning.
But you seem to be going beyond that, because you seem to be saying Brian Williams, in editing, in reading this piece, may justify bigotry or violence against Muslims if he doesn't include a line about how most Muslims are peace-loving people.
Whether it was Pearl Harbor or any other violent act that's been committed against this country, there is always the fear that a wider group of people are going to get blamed for the insidious acts.
How far could you take this? I mean, you go to Dachau and you need a statement that not all Germans supported Adolf Hitler?
Well, you go, for example, when I talked to someone today who was covered Serbia and said, you know, it was very clear if you asked the average American that what the Serbians did in Yugoslavia at the end of that time, they would know there was violence, but they wouldn't know they were Christian. So what we're saying is, let's be clear when we identify someone's religious tradition, that as a reminder, or even, you know, a disclaimer at the very beginning, here's what we want to see, and then you have the more detailed description.
Thank you for being here. I want to get to Brooke Goldstein now as well, who's with us. Brooke, you know, the thing is, this memorial is not about the peace-loving Muslims and making them feel better about their usage of the word jihad, etc.
And it's not about Islam. I think Reverend Breyer and the people on the panel are being incredibly intellectually dishonest when they say that the purpose of the museum is to portray a positive version of Islam or to portray Islam in the most positive light. The purpose of a museum is to portray accurately history and to portray the truth. And the truth about 9/11 is that the 9/11 hijackers were motivated by a version of Islam that justifies suicide, homicidal violence against civilians. The fact is that there are thousands and thousands of mosques around the world, especially in Hamburg, the Al-Quds Mosque, which was shut down for preaching Al-Qaeda's version of Islam, where the 9/11 hijackers were trained. This is a real and imminent threat to our Western civilization, and we are engaged in semantic debates, making deals with ourselves about how to define an enemy that attacked us over 14 years ago.
But what about the Reverend's point that not mentioning that the vast majority of Muslims have no wish to do us harm may leave some walking away from this video thinking, oh, Muslims are bad, Muslims attacked us?
I mean, that she has a very low opinion of Americans if she thinks that Americans are too dumb, that when they walk into a memorial for 9/11 victims, that they're not going to be able to distinguish between the Al-Qaeda hijackers and peaceful Muslims who do not ascribe to that version of Islam. The imam, frankly, who was also on the panel, his critique of the film is not about the content. The critique is not that the film portrays Al-Qaeda inaccurately. It says the critique is that it portrays Al-Qaeda as an Islamist, jihadist, self-described Islamist jihadist terrorist group. The critique is that it portrays the truth, and the truth is offensive to Muslims. Again, a very low opinion of Muslims if they think Muslims are going to be offended by showing the facts.
They don't like the term jihad. They say if generalized labels are needed, we suggest using specific terms such as Al-Qaeda-inspired terrorism. And that viewers would be given a more comprehensive definition of jihad. You heard that discussion. Your thoughts?
You know, it's incredibly sad. Again, Major Nidal Hassan did not mince words when he opened fire and screamed Allah Akbar and murdered Americans. The terrorists in Kenya were not debating semantics when they separated Muslims from non-Muslims and butchered women and children. We here in the West, again, we are making deals with ourselves. And this is pathetic, especially after 14 years after 9/11, because if we can't tell the truth about the enemy that we're facing, and by the way, even President Obama said Al-Qaeda is the enemy of the United States. If we can't understand that, if we can't talk about it, then how are we supposed to defeat radical Islam? This panel should be more concerned with defeating Islamist terrorism as opposed to diverting attention away from the victims and the cause of 9/11.
It's something to think that, 12 years after 3,000 Americans were murdered right in front of our very eyes in a museum that honors their memory and talks about what happened to them in that crime, we are dealing with the objections of how to portray Islam, how to portray Muslims. That's become a pause in this debate because we're worried about, certain people's feelings. However, Brooke, it's a group of people who don't mean to hurt anybody, who condemn 9/11, and those people shouldn't be grouped unnecessarily by mistake or otherwise with the radical Islamists who did do us harm. I'll give you the final word.
What are we gaining from this debate? I mean, do we really think that Americans are not smart enough to be able to distinguish between the two? I mean, history will repeat itself if we cannot accurately learn from it and make sure it does not happen again. Radical Islam is a threat to America. I'm not afraid to say that, and I commend the museum for sticking to the truth.
Brooke, great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for